It was a rainy, cold night, one of those shifts where the clock just seems to stop. I was working the closing shift at my usual Starbucks, tucked away in a quiet part of town. It was a small store, not one of those busy, bustling ones in the city center. We had our regulars, but by 10 p.m., it was usually dead. That night something felt off. As soon as I walked in, the air was heavy, and the fluorescent lights flickered as I set up for the night. I chalked it up to the weather, trying to shake the creeping unease as I started my routine. Around 11 p.m., we were down to just two people, me and my coworker, Sarah. She was in the back, cleaning up, while I manned the counter, waiting for the occasional late-night customer. Suddenly the door chimed, and in walked a man. He looked drenched, his coat dripping water onto the floor. But what struck me was his face, pale, almost gray, with dark circles under his eyes. He didn't say a word as he approached the counter, just stared at the menu. I forced a smile. "What can I get you tonight?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. He didn't respond immediately, just kept staring. Finally, he muttered something that sounded like black coffee, but his voice was so low, I could barely hear it. I nodded, trying to suppress the unease gnawing at my stomach. As I prepared his drink, I felt his eyes on me the entire time. It was unnerving. When I turned to hand him the cup, he was standing much closer than before, too close. I nearly dropped the coffee in shock. His eyes were hollow, almost lifeless, and his skin seemed even more ashen up close. "Here you go," I said, my voice trembling. He took the cup without a word, but instead of leaving, he just stood there, staring at me. The silence was suffocating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked out into the storm, disappearing into the night. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, and turned to Sarah, who had come out from the back, looking as pale as I felt. "Did you see that guy?" I asked her, hoping she could help me make sense of the encounter. Sarah nodded, but her face was troubled. "I saw him, but he looked different to me. Older, like really old. And when he walked past me, I swear the temperature dropped. A chill ran down my spine." We tried to shake it off, convincing ourselves it was just a weird customer, but the unease lingered. We decided to close up early, the atmosphere too heavy to ignore. As we were locking up, Sarah stopped suddenly, her face going white as a sheet. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the floor where the man had stood. There, in the spot where he had dripped water, was a pool of dark liquid, but it wasn't water. It was thick, almost black, and reeked of something foul. We bolted out of there, not even bothering to finish walking up. The next day, when we told our manager, she brushed it off as a prank or an overactive imagination. But Sarah and I knew what we saw, and we never worked a late-night shift alone again. Working the morning rush hour. Starbucks is always chaotic. Asterisk, asterisk. Orders come in non-stop. Customers are half awake and impatient, and it's easy to lose track of what's going on. I've been a barista for years, so I've seen it all, or so I thought. This particular morning, everything was going smoothly. The line was long, but we were handling it well. I was on the espresso machine, cranking out lattes and cappuccinos like a machine. The line of cups on the counter seemed endless, but I was in the zone, getting through them one by one. Then I noticed something strange. I reached for the next cup in line and ordered for a venti caramel macchiato, and it wasn't there. I looked around, thinking maybe I had already made it, but it was just gone. I shrugged it off, thinking someone might have grabbed it early or there was a mix-up. I moved on to the next order, a grande mocha, but as soon as I turned to start making it, the cup vanished right before my eyes. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. There was no one near me who could have taken it, and it didn't fall, it just disappeared. I called over my coworker, John, who was working the register. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaky. He gave me a confused look. "See what?" "The cup, it just vanished." He laughed it off, assuming I was messing with him. But I wasn't. I was dead serious. The customers, too, were starting to get impatient, so I had to keep working. I grabbed another cup and started making the order again, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. But it kept happening. Every third or fourth cup I reached for would disappear right in front of me. It was like some cruel joke that only I was in on. I tried to focus, to keep the orders moving, but the more it happened, the more rattled I became. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped away from the machine, telling John to take over. I needed to get away from that counter, away from whatever was happening. As I backed away, I glanced at the customers, but none of them seemed to notice anything unusual. In the back room, I tried to collect myself. I must have been working too hard. Not enough sleep. I was just seeing things, right? But the fear clung to me, refusing to let go. After my break, I went back out, dreading what might happen next. But as the morning rush died down, the disappearing cups stopped. The rest of the shift was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been messing with me. To this day, I have no explanation. I never told anyone else about it, afraid they'd think I was crazy. But every time I work the morning shift, I can't help but keep one eye on the counter, waiting to see if it will happen again. In every Starbucks, there's always that one regular who comes in like clockwork, orders the same thing, and sits in the same spot. For us, it was an older man who we called Mr. Thompson. He wasn't particularly friendly, but he was polite, always nodding his thanks when we handed him his coffee. He always ordered the same thing, a tall black coffee, no room, and a blueberry muffin. Then he'd sit in the corner by the window, sipping his coffee slowly while reading a thick, old book. Mr. Thompson had been coming in every day for as long as I could remember. He was such a fixture that we knew to have his order ready as soon as we saw him walking up. But then one day, he didn't show up. It wasn't a big deal at first. People miss days. But then another day passed, and another. A week went by, and still no Mr. Thompson. We all started to wonder what had happened. It was strange for him to miss a day, let alone a week. One of my coworkers joked that maybe he finally finished his book and had no reason to come in anymore. But something about it didn't sit right with me. After 2 weeks, I mentioned it to one of our regulars, a woman who often sat near Mr. Thompson. She looked surprised when I asked if she had seen him. "Mr. Thompson," she said, frowning. "I don't think I know who that is." I was taken aback. "You know, the older guy who always sits by the window with the book. He's here every morning." But she shook her head, looking genuinely confused. "I don't remember anyone like that." I brushed it off as a misunderstanding. But as more time passed, I started to get this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just that Mr. Thompson was gone, it was like he had never existed. No one seemed to remember him except for the staff. Finally, I decided to ask my manager about it. She'd been working at the store longer than anyone, so I figured she'd have some idea of what happened to Mr. Thompson. When I brought it up, she gave me a strange look. "Who's Mr. Thompson?" she asked. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You know, the guy who comes in every morning for coffee and a muffin. He's been coming here for years." She shook her head slowly. "I've worked here for over 5 years, and I don't remember anyone like that." A chill ran down my spine. How could she not remember him? He was here every day. But as I looked around the store, it was like all trace of him had vanished. His usual spot was taken by someone else, and there was no sign that he had ever been there. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. How could a person just disappear like that? And why didn't anyone else remember him? I tried to talk to my coworkers about it, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. It's been months now, and I've stopped talking about Mr. Thompson, but every time I walk past that corner where he used to sit, I get this eerie feeling, like he's still there, just out of sight. I keep expecting to see him walk through the door again, but he never does. Some nights, when I'm closing up and the store is empty, I swear I can feel someone watching me from that corner. It's silly, I know, but I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. I've tried looking him up online, searching for any trace of a man who matches his description, but I found nothing. No records, no obituaries, nothing. It's like he never existed. I've come to terms with the fact that I may never know the truth, whether Mr. Thompson was a ghost, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely. I'll never understand, but I'll always remember him, and the cold, empty spot in the corner of the store will forever be a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved.